Welcome to the Investopedia Advisor webinar series. I'm Caleb Silver, the editor-in-chief of Investopedia. Delighted to be here with Carolyn McClanahan and Marguerita Cheng, two of our favorite advisors. And we're going to be talking about radical transparency among advisors, especially independent advisors. And these two are really good at that. That's why we have them with us, are perennially on our list of the Investopedia most influential financial advisors in the United States, because they're great at educating, they're great at talking to clients, they're great at inspiring their colleagues in the industry, and they're all about radical transparency. So delighted to be with you, to have you with us, I should say, and thank you guys for being here.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
Let's start with you, Rita. This is something I've known about you ever since we met a few years ago, but radical transparency is sort of your calling card in a way, but it's also the way you communicate with your clients and the way you communicate with the public. But what does it mean to you when we say those words?
I think that it means being authentic and, of course, transparent, but it means communicating to your clients in a way where you are not talking over them and you're not talking down to them, but you're making personal finance relatable and accessible. And that's how I always view the world. The other thing I'm going to say before I kick it to Carolyn is I know there's certain things that I cannot do. I can't talk about politics. I can't talk about taxes, markets, but I can talk to you about family, personal finance. And I think when I share my story, listen, I don't think I'm so great, but I think that people really appreciate. They're like, oh, needs versus wants, nudging your parents to develop a plan for long-term care. So to me, that's what radical transparency means, just making personal finance relatable and accessible and being bold and courageous.
Yeah.
You're so good at that. Carolyn, what about you?
I'd like to add on to that. To me, being genuine and being willing to share stories, your stories, and like Rita said, making things relatable is so important. And for me, I do talk about everything. And I think everybody has a different style of how they work with people and with clients. I'm very much out there as far as how I feel about things. So I'm not shy about my truth telling, I guess you would call it, because everybody has a different truth. But I do talk about things like taxes and politics. And I'm especially known, and I've gotten, in the press a few times because I do talk about politics, but I talk about anything. Humans, we all have issues. And by sharing those issues and being willing to open up those cans of worms, we can do a much better job helping clients.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And the odd thing is that everyone, when they think about money, it's something that nobody really likes to talk about. We don't like talking about it, just like our health. Those are the two things that are most important to us, most vital, but we hate talking about it either because of shame, or we don't understand, or we fear that we don't understand, or we don't want people to know. But you both are in the business of having the conversation, right? Helping people unpack their financial needs. And as those financial needs tie into the way that they live their lives, which is really holistic financial planning, which you're both known for across your practices. But it wasn't always this way in the industry, was it, Rita? And how did you evolve through it and learn that this was the path you wanted to walk?
Sure, it's true. It wasn't always that way in the industry. I mean, I remember when I joined the profession, there's nobody who looked like me. And a lot of people are funny, like there's nobody who's 6 feet tall. I'm like, first of all, I'm not 6 feet tall. I'm only 5'8", but I get where you're going with this. It's not just gender, but it's race, ethnicity. And I also had 2 very little kids, 3 and 6 months. But what I realized is that, remember, I started my career at a large firm. And that's why, I knew I couldn't talk about politics, markets, and this because compliance. But what I realized is there were things I could talk about that were 100% compliant, and clients liked to hear those stories. And that's when I started to feel that it was okay, not only okay, but people actually loved me for talking about what it was like to caregive for my 8-year-old and my 80-year-old dad at the same time. That didn't violate compliance. And then I kind of made it my mission to talk about not just money, but the issues that we were facing. What do I do? Like, how do I navigate care for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old, save for retirement, college, and keep my head on straight? So it wasn't always that way. And I tell people all the time that your voice really matters. Your story really matters. And don't be shy. Like, I'm actually an introvert, but that doesn't mean that I'm not afraid to speak up. I will kind of observe people. And then when I think that I have something of value to add, I will speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the caring for an 8 to 80-year-old, you know what that's called? Real life, right? And that's what people go through.
Yeah.
And that's why they seek financial advice and financial planning, because that's a real life issue. And, you certainly weren't the first person to have that, and you won't be the last, but so many people face that. And Carolyn, I know in your practice and through your background, you came up, you have a medical background as well. So you also understand a lot of what's happening to people on the health front and the financial front, and how closely those are tied in. How important is that for you to be able to make those connections?
Well, to me, health and finance go hand in hand. And I've said that for decades now. It's, if you don't have your physical health, what good is financial health? And financial health makes it easier to have good physical health. And, people have a hard time. You talked about how people have a hard time talking about money and health. Well, try talking about them at the same time. It's really hard, especially end of life issues, dementia, aging issues. And if we learn how to normalize these conversations and how to talk about them comfortably, that lifts a huge weight off our clients' shoulders. And so even though I have a background in medicine, which does, I'll have to admit, it does make it easier to have conversations around health, especially where they intersect with finance. But advisors can do this too. And I stress, people are actually probably more comfortable talking about health than they are about finance, because a lot of your health you don't have control over. And so they're not embarrassed that, people talk about their prostates and other problems all day. And, but money, they're worried because they're supposed to be smarter around money. And they feel like if they've made mistakes or they don't know what's going on, it doesn't make them feel good about themselves. But so learning how to put people at ease and letting people know that we're all human and we all have things to learn, and creating that safe space for them to share what they don't know so we can do a better job with education is so important.
I think that's huge. And just let's take that a step further. How does that manifest in terms of your practice, in terms of the way you set up your services for a client or a family or a couple, when you're looking at, let's look at life stages now, let's look at the things that you might not be anticipating, but do come up. How do you do that in that sort of those initial conversations, Carolyn?
Well, one important question we ask every client, I don't care the age, is what do you do to take care of your health? And we've had clients that are so proud, they say, well, and new clients will say, I started running about 2 years ago and I've lost 50 pounds and I just did my first half marathon. That tells you a lot about that person. I've had another client say, I do 12-ounce curls. That tells you a lot too. And so it gives you good information of things to look for in currently and in the future, and just to be observant around a person. If you have a young person who's living a very unhealthy lifestyle, then you have to plan for that. They could get diabetes earlier. They could get all kinds of health issues. And if you haven't talked to them about those potential issues, you've done a disservice. So just starting with that very simple question, what do you do to take care of your health, lets the client know that you're at ease talking about their health, and it hopefully puts them at ease.
Yeah, so true, so important. Again, difficult conversations, which is why you need the radical transparency of it all. And I know, Rita, you deal with some of these issues too, but you also deal with the sticky issues of elder care, but even divorce, which is pretty common now across America, and how to deal with that. These are areas that also require some deftness in terms of having those conversations, but you can't avoid them because they're real life. Talk about some of the difficult but kind of normal issues that come up all the time in your practice.
Well, sure. I think what's really important here, sometimes clients come to us because they want to do planning, but oftentimes they are focused on just addressing the planning that they want to do. Now, what are you talking about? They just want to focus on investments because that's sexy and glamorous. But financial planning is so much more than that, right? It is cash flow, budgeting, insurance, taxes, estate. So I think when we open up and explain what financial planning is and how, yes, we are going to focus on investments, but my job as a fiduciary is to make sure that we are doing not only the planning you want to do, because you are the clients, but I also need to make sure that we are addressing the planning you don't want to do. So what are some examples? I think insurance and estate planning are huge. You know, it's divorce. Listen, if you were having challenges with your honey and partner when you were married, do you really think it's going to get easier? So I just put it out there. I mean, I tell people, my kids will tell you, like, I'm going to smile, but I'm also going to make sure you like do the planning you need to do. I don't want to say nag. I'm going to say nudge. And I think that people know that I have their best interests in mind. Some examples about the topic of divorce is, you know, disability insurance, life insurance. You know, I don't care if where you get it. The reality is you need it. Just because you don't buy it doesn't mean you're not going to die. And just because you do doesn't mean you will. And I think that when you put it out there, people are more likely to listen.
Sure. Right. These are the things that happen over the normal course of everybody's lives. And that's holistic financial planning, which it almost demands, it actually does demand the radical transparency, because it is not just the investments we have, you know, ETFs, index funds, robo-advisors, all kinds of different ways to invest and to invest your clients' money. And no one's outsmarting the market here. But you can create the right investment plan. Again, just a slice of the planning that needs to happen. And that key part of the planning is that North Star planning, right, Carolyn? Where do you want to be in 10 years, 15, 20, depending on the age of your client, or if you're in that older stage of your life, how do you want your estate to play out? So how do you approach the holistic planning with folks at the different life stages as they come through your practice?
Well, the first thing that we do before we even take a client, we have these things called client engagement standards, where we spell out that we do comprehensive planning. And if they don't want comprehensive planning, then we're not the right fit for them. And so most people who come to us, we've developed a reputation through the years. So thankfully, they know that that is what we focus on, and that's why they're there. And so we, in addition to focusing on planning for the future, the first question, in addition to asking about health, but the first question to me that's most important to answer is the person happy now? Because if a person isn't happy, you've got to figure out why. And is it because they hate their job, they hate their spouse, or, what's going on there? Because if a person isn't happy, then it's highly likely that anything you do on the financial plan to help them plan for the future, it's going to be like pushing a wall. And so making certain, and you don't know when people are going to die. So it's always great to make, and that's a doctor speaking, of course, it's always great to make sure that that person is doing well in the moment. And then if they're not, you address that first, and then you start ticking off the list of things they need to think about. So each lifestyle is different. And so early on, it's going to be more about accumulation and making sure they have the right insurance in place. That mid stage, they may be in the sandwich generation. You're making certain they're thinking about their parents, themselves, and their kids. And then in that later stage, not only, it's not just about the estate plan, making certain that they have the processes and things in place so that they can transfer their care as they age over to whoever's going to be their surrogate. So different times call for different needs. And it's all starting though with making sure that they're in a good place to work on all those issues.
Have you ever turned away a potential client because they weren't or happy or did not seem like they could get to the place where you could do productive financial planning with them, Carolyn?
Well, with our client engagement standards, that really sets the tone. And most people wouldn't, if they don't resonate with those client engagement standards, they're not going to call us back. We also provide with them our investment philosophy and do investment education before a person can become a client. So if they don't agree with our investment philosophy in advance, we will not take a client. It's very interesting because we end up being a big referral source for a lot of other advisors because we will not take a client. And so the people who come on board, they totally get it. And if they're not following the engagement standards, and I don't want those to sound like something like mean, they're actually very caring of, if you can't participate in ongoing financial planning, we're not a good fit for you. And so, or if you can't return phone calls in a timely fashion or get the work done, we need to readdress our relationship. And the most important engagement standard to me is if we're not enjoying each other's company, we need to revisit our relationship. And so by having those engagement standards, I can bring them back to the table if they're not really following them and say, you're not getting your planning done. What can we do to make that happen? If not, we need to part ways. And on the engagement standards too, it's just not what the clients have to do, it's what we deliver. Like we return all phone calls within a day. It's crazy how these little things are so important to clients. And actually to me, that sort of thing is not a little thing, but how just promising basics just makes clients feel at peace and allows them to open up and get their planning done. And it's so funny to me, the number of clients that say, I'm sorry, I haven't gotten back to you. Don't fire me. And they get the stuff done.
Yeah. How about you, Rita? You got a lot of clients there at Blue Ocean. You got legacies there, but have you ever had to turn clients away either at the get-go or fire a client because they weren't on the same page in terms of radical transparency and being candid and doing the work?
Well, first, I was so excited that Carolyn and I are here together because we share the same philosophy. I actually will not take a client unless he, she, they do financial planning. Some people say, that's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to gather your data. It's a lot of work for us. So some people self-select. I have had to tell people that, it may not be a good fit. I can't tell you whether you should take the pension or the lump sum unless I know your other assets, liabilities, income expenses, healthcare, and family status, meaning are you planning to retire at the same time as your spouse or partner? Do you have any dependents? And people that's a lot of questions. Those are a lot of questions. But for me to do the best job for you, I need to know this information. I think what surprises me is people thank me like, Rita, thank you so much for returning my call. And I'm thinking, good God, this is just basic courtesy. And you know what? And even if I don't know the answer, I might call somebody or email and say, hey, just wanted to give you an update, still waiting to hear the response. These are little things, but they are really important to people. That gives them peace of mind because that means you're paying attention. And at the end of the day, people just want to know that you care. It sounds a little bit cliche, but they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's great that Marguerita is a CFP pro and on Investopedia list, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I genuinely care and my team cares about their family.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's courtesy, it's common sense, it's customer service, it's relationship building, it's all of those things, the intangibles of running a business. But let's get into the transparency part of running your businesses, because these are complex small businesses. You got a lot of clients, you got back end work, you got marketing work, you got staff, you got to pay people, you got to pay yourselves. Rita, let's start with you in terms of the transparency around fees, around the way your business works and explaining that to clients. How are those conversations? I know people want to know, how do I pay you? How do you get paid? Are you getting paid for recommending things? You guys are, probably in the fee only category or fee based. How does it work with you, Rita?
So sure. So when I onboard a client, I hope it's okay to say this, before we even take any money under management, they must do financial planning. The other thing is I need to know how they feel about risk. So I am going to use risk profiling software so that they understand if there's a disconnect, that's okay. We need to be having this conversation. And then from that, I am going to tell them the financial planning fee for working with me. I find that I spend a lot of time, and this is time well spent, explaining to them products that perhaps they purchased from someone else. They didn't know that they paid a front-end sales charge, or maybe they didn't know that annuity had a 15-year surrender. Sometimes people are like, can I give you this annuity? No, I thought it's out of surrender. It is, but you have 3 more years of guarantees, so that needs to stay where it is. So I think that people really appreciate this level of detail, because I do think it's important to be transparent about fees, costs. Financial planning does cost money. I am not going to be the cheapest, but what I'm going to tell you is I am going to make sure that you and your family get the best planning.
Yeah,
So yes, that's how it works here.
sure. And I'm sure people, some people maybe don't care, but some people really want to know, Carolyn. They want to know,
Mhm.
are you making money off of this? Are you, why are you selling this to me? Or why do I think, do I need it? Although they've come to trust you over time, I'm sure that's not the case. But for new clients and people like sort of thinking about entering your practice, how do you communicate the fee structure? Is that in the initial conversations and the marketing material? How do you do that?
So we charge flat fees for everything based on complexity. And so when a potential new client comes in that first meeting, they've already read the engagement standards in our investment philosophy, so they know what they're getting into. And that first meeting, they bring in the basics, or they've already uploaded the basics of their situation to us. And our fees are set based on how much work we're going to be doing. So do they have a complicated tax situation? Do they have multi-generational family? Do they have trust? Do they have businesses? All that matters. And we manage all the investments, but that's also under a flat fee too. Everything's encompassed in that one fee. And so for us, we have this basic formula that we don't spell it out for clients, and they don't really ask, but people can. I've been on so many podcasts explaining our fee structure through the years that people could find how we do it, but it's number of family members and all that. So I'll just say your fee is going to be this certain amount. And for people who are under, if they were to compare us to like a typical AUM, an advisor who charges based on assets, if they have less than $1 million, we may be expensive because the planning is so intense for a lot of people that our fee may end up being higher. For people 1 to 2 million, we probably come in, again, it depends on businesses and all that, but we probably come in about the same. People over $2 million in assets, we end up being a huge bargain for. We charge a significantly amount less than that. And so we say that fee right off the bat. You're paying us $2,500 a quarter, $3,000 a quarter, or whatever it's going to be. And they love that. And in fact, most of our clients are the millionaire next door do-it-yourselfer who's become too complicated to do it themselves well anymore. And so they realize they're aging, that they're missing out because they don't understand the tax planning, the estate planning. So we have very smart clients who understand the value that they're getting, and they don't give us any issue about our fees.
Yeah, I mean that we always recommend to people, if you can have a financial advisor or a planner, you should. And if you don't think you can afford to, you probably can't afford not to, because you just don't know what you don't know. And so many people try to do it themselves, and there are many people that can. But when it comes to the complexity that some families get into, there is no other way to do it. What's the toughest thing, Rita, you've ever had to tell a client? And you don't have to tell me, you obviously protect the anonymity, but what are some of those difficult conversations, and among the most difficult that you've had to have and had to really exercise that radical transparency?
Oh, absolutely. I have no problem sharing it. This is actually when I was a younger, newer advisor, and someone came to me and they said that a broker told them that they could get 10%. I was in my 30s. I hadn't given birth to my third child. I said, sir, I don't want to disrespect anybody. It would be inappropriate for me to call anybody a liar. But if I tell you to do this and you retire and you're out of money, God willing, I'm still going to be alive. And it would be a huge disservice for me to tell you that 10% withdrawal rate is sustainable. I spoke the truth. I mean, I had his best interests, and he even thanked me. He said, I appreciate your integrity and honesty, but I'm going to go in a different direction. I thought that was really important to just say how it was. Another difficult story, because it's fast and furious, is clients wanted to retire. And I told them, I was like, there is nothing in the world to stop you from retiring. In retirement, there's the amount that you spend in retirement, the rate of return of your assets, and then the time in retirement. I think about sustainability. And if you want to stay retired in DC Metro, you may have to cut back your lifestyle. And the clients really appreciated that. They did still retire, but I gave them a homework assignment. And I said, your job over the next 2 years, you have a travel budget of X. I want you to both travel the country and find a place where you think you both would be happy. And they did it, and they retired to this new place, and they cut their living expenses by 40%, and they are still retired today.
That's a great success story. And that's a difficult one. It's like uproot.
Right.
You want to do this, you can, but not in this zip code. You're going to have to,
Yeah.
you're going to have to head somewhere else. That's but I can, you know, again, real life, real issue. I can completely imagine that conversation. I may have to have it myself. Carolyn, what about you? What's the most difficult thing you've had to tell a client or two?
Oh, goodness. I've had a number of those. Well, you know, with me, especially with my background in health, that I've had a client, we've actually had to commit to a mental institution. So that was pretty hard. And the family is very thankful that we have helped facilitate that. And I think, you know, is that something a typical advisor could do? If you have clients with mental health issues, which, you know, there are a few articles out there, but we need to do a lot more work in this area. We need to have good conversations about getting those clients into therapy. And if they're seriously having challenges, you know, to ask those basic questions like, are you okay mentally? And even to gently ask, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And just that's being a human. That's not, you don't need to be a doctor to do that. But if you recognize a client's having a challenge with something, bringing it up and addressing it it can save their life. And so, because advisors are very close to their clients, and you may be the first person to recognize something. The other is, of course, dementia. I speak on this all over the place. And so, you know, when you're recognizing that a client isn't thinking well, or they may be challenged with managing their finances, bring it up early. I've had to do that. And so it's more to me, the challenge isn't telling people about money issues. It's about having to challenge them on control issues, because those are all areas where they're losing control. And if you don't help them, it can be a disaster, not just financially, but in other ways for that client and their family.
I remember the first time I met you was at a panel. I was moderating this conversation about dealing with family members that may have dementia, or telling their children that, look, I've been speaking to her or him for the past several months, and they're not making any sense anymore. You're going to have to make a call here. Let me help you. Very difficult. Talk about the extreme of radical transparency. Telling somebody that, you know, they may not be keeping it together, telling their family members. That's so challenging. But again, that's why it's so important that you guys are such good communicators. And that's really the part of the job that I don't think a lot of people talk about. How do you get trained for something like this, Rita? Or is this just 10,000 hours of being around human beings and helping them with their problems?
You know, this is such an interesting question. I think that people talk about soft skills and hard skills, but there is nothing soft and easy about these communication skills. I mean, I did grow up in a multiracial, multicultural, and multi-religion family. So from just such a young age, I always knew like how to navigate things. Like I celebrated Chinese New Year and Christmas. We're burning incense. I have to go to religious ed and Mandarin school on the same weekend. So I always kind of like learned, okay, this is how I interact with this group, and this is how I interact with that group, kind of like taking everything in. I think that there's certain things that you can learn, but you also have to be committed to always working at these skills. I so appreciate what Carolyn was saying about cognitive decline. These are very awkward conversations, but they are so important, because if we don't talk about it, who will?
Right.
And that's what I always tell myself. I could tell you I'm sweet, my pacing is on point, I'm not going to be disrespectful, but I also know I have a responsibility to not just tell you what you want to hear, but tell you what you need to hear. And when I communicate like that, I have never had anybody hang up the phone, send me a nasty email, curse at me, kick me out of their home. It just doesn't happen. Not because I think I'm arrogant or great. People know that I genuinely care. And I think, Caleb, that's what matters. You can't enter this profession just see that you want to amass a bunch of AUM and think that you're a hero. There's so much more to that.
No question about it. And you just let Carolyn and I know if anybody calls you and
Yeah.
nasty or sends you a
We'll take
nasty
care
mail,
of that.
because we're coming after them. That's just not going to happen. We're not going to stand for that. Carolyn, who sort of, who did you follow coming up as you developed in your practice? Were there people or influences that you took note of and you're like, I really love the way they communicate, or I love the way they are with clients, or I don't like the way they are with clients, and I'm going to go the other direction here? Were there influences for you as you grew in your career?
Oh gosh, yes. And it goes back to medicine too. In medicine, you have to have hard conversations. And so I took communication classes basically both in college and in high school. We actually had a great communication class. And so I ended up teaching the bedside manner class when I was on faculty at University of Florida. And so I had to leg up on people on how to have those hard conversations. But then I still had so much to learn. And there was a great book I read that I recommend to everybody. It's Susan Scott's Fierce Conversations, on learning how to have hard conversations and making everybody feel good about them. And so to me, that just should be a course that everybody should take. And she does. I don't even know the woman. She doesn't pay me to say that. And then there was early on, I've had so many mentors in this profession. Cheryl Holland of Abacus Planning is one of those. I mean, her manner was just so great. She built this early on. I mean, because I started my practice in 2004, and that's when I met her. She just built this incredible financial planning practice and had so many good processes in place on how they communicate in their practice. So she was a great mentor to me. And it is a constant practice. Someday, it's especially Fierce Conversations. I've read that like 4 times. And if I have a hard conversation coming up, I'll actually pick up the book, and because it has a process of how you prepare for a hard conversation, which I think is really important. And every day is a new day. In fact, this morning I had a conversation with a client, and I got on her nerves about something, and she snapped at me, and I said, I'm sorry. I feel like you're biting off my head for doing my job. And she's been a client for almost 20 years now. So since I've started in my practice, and, because sometimes you get close to people. And so we just stepped back and laughed, because we're both under the gun for something that needs to get done. And so we apologized and said, thank you. And so every day's a new day, and you're going to be excellent some days. And like Rita said, we're not always the best, and we're not, and we're working from our heart, but after a lot of practice, you become pretty good most of the time.
I wrote that book name down because I need that. How many times if you're about to have that difficult conversation, you're there like go for a run, or you're cooking and you're chopping furiously because you're getting all intense about it. Rita, I'll let you take us out with your inspirations and people who have inspired you and you've learned from over the years, or books that you've learned from that may help other people who are coming into this business, who are maybe in it right now, be able to develop these radical transparency muscles like the two of you have.
I read a lot, and some of the books that I have been reading, so I joined a book club. It's virtual. It's the Next Big Idea book club. And there are books in this club by Dan Pink. I love Daniel Pink. Adam Grant, also Susan Cain, and Malcolm Gladwell. I would say, I think that it's so important to always read. You don't need to necessarily agree with what you're reading. But one of my favorite books, I would say, is about emotions at work. And I don't remember the title, but it is in that group of the Next Big Idea book club. I like the book so much that I actually, my daughter read it as well. So I'm sorry, the title escapes me. No Hard Feelings. Yes, she heard me.
Yay,
no hard
from
feelings.
the sidelines.
Yes,
Awesome.
No hard feelings. I think that everybody, it is a fast read. It is incredibly beneficial because it could help someone in college navigate how to communicate with a professor. It could also help a client learn how to deal with a difficult employer and everything in between. So I recommend that book. And just because it's so helpful.
Yes. So folks, just in case you missed it, Fierce Conversations and No Hard Feelings, 2 books that are now on my list. I'm going to get those as well. And thanks so much to the both of you. Carolyn McClanahan, Marguerita Cheng, you are influential because you are so generous with your time, with your education, with your spirit of generosity, not only to your clients, but across the industry, to your colleagues, and again, to Investopedia. We're so grateful to you. And thanks so much for having this conversation with us and sharing it with our audience.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. It's so good to be with Rita too. I miss seeing you.
Thank you so much for having us. I know I'm so excited to be with Carolyn, and we are so happy to be here and be part of the Investopedia family.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And thanks for you folks on the Investopedia Advisor webinar series, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.